Hi, uh, today we'll discuss about vulnerability management, interview questions and answers, which includes L1, L2, L3, and scenario-based questions with detailed explanations. Coming to the first question, what is vulnerability management? Vulnerability management is the continuous process of identifying and evaluating, treating, and reporting security vulnerabilities in systems and software. It involves scanning and risk assessment, prioritization, remediation, and validation to reduce security risk. Second question, what is difference between vulnerability threat and risk? Vulnerability, it is a weakness in a software or hardware which is identified, and also it includes the weakness that it is identified in protocol. Threat, it is a potential event or actor exploiting a vulnerability, and risk is the likelihood and impact of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. Risk will be calculated based on the impact of the vulnerability and what whether what type of critical vulnerability it is identified. What is CVE? CVE stands for Common Vulnerability and Exposure. It is a publicly available database of known security vulnerabilities maintained by MITRE, and there are other websites called NIST GOV where we can have the list of vulnerabilities which are known, and each vulnerability is assigned a unique number called CVID, and CVID is consists of with the prefix of CVE and hyphen with the year when the vulnerability is identified, hyphen the CVE number, means which is a common number which is identified. This we called it as CVID. What is CVSS? CVSS stands for Common Vulnerability Scoring System. It is a standard where all the organization uses the in order to score the what vulnerabilities are there. And it is a framework for rating security vulnerabilities with scores from 0 to 10, classified into low, medium, high, critical, and based on severity. Steps in patch management. Sometimes they ask what are the steps that included in patch management in order to fix the vulnerabilities. So first one, coming to identify vulnerabilities and assess patch relevance, means what patch we need to be fixed. We need to perform assessment, means we need to identify and test patches and then deploy patches, monitor deployment and maintain compliance. So in order to detail of these steps, first thing, identify vulnerabilities by using vulnerability scanning tools. We will be identifying those vulnerabilities, and then we will be performing assessment on those vulnerabilities. Means where what are the vulnerabilities are identified and which patch need to be fixed, need to be deployed in order to fix those vulnerabilities. We need to test, and before deploying on the production, we need to test in the environment for those patches. And then once we got the confirmation, then we will be deploying those patches in production. And while deploying, we need to monitor whether deployment is getting running successfully or not. And then we need to maintain in compliance in case of any schedules. Common vulnerability scanning tools, like there are many tools in the market: Qualys, Rapid7, Insight VM, Nessus, OpenVAS, and each providing scanning capabilities for detecting vulnerabilities. Uh, the common thing on the different tools, they may be different tools, but the functioning will be same. But maybe the workflow, some may detect the raw data and it will show the raw logs to after finding the vulnerability. Some may have the email preparation. So here you can see the Qualys where after identifying those vulnerabilities, it will generate an email to the manager. So manager will assign to the engineer in order to fix those vulnerabilities. And how often should scans can be done? Organization should perform weekly, monthly scans, ad hoc scans for new vulnerabilities, and post-patch verification scans. So it depends on the organization policy. We can perform uh, on daily basis or weekly basis and monthly cases. And in case if required, after performing a patch, means manually also we can test, we can perform the scanning to identify the vulnerabilities, whether it got fixed or any new vulnerabilities are identified. And what is CWE? CWE stands for Common Weakness Enumeration. It is a list of software or hardware security weakness compiled by the metric. And difference between vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. Vulnerability scanning is automated, detects known issues, While penetration testing simulates real-world attacks to identify security flaws. Means vulnerability scanning means it is a common process where we'll be identifying vulnerabilities which are known, which are detected after performing a vulnerability scanning. And whereas coming to penetration testing, it is a step we need to step forward, and we will be testing. We'll be scanning. Means we will be performing penetration testing on the servers, and we need to identify what are the security flaws. Means we need to identify any new vulnerabilities are identified, and we need to report them. Best practices for vulnerability management: maintain asset inventory, conduct regular scans, prioritize vulnerabilities, and implement patching, and use compensating controls and monitor continuously. How do you prioritize vulnerabilities? So we can prioritize based on the CVSS score, exploitability, business impact, and asset criticality and patch availability. What are zero-day vulnerabilities? A zero-day vulnerability is a security flaw with no official patch available, making it highly risky. How do you handle a critical vulnerability without a patch? Apply workarounds and disable affected services, implement firewall rules, monitor logs, and request vendor mitigation. Explain the vulnerability remediation process. Means identifying vulnerabilities, assess risk, and prioritize, apply patches or mitigations, means which we need to change misconfigurations, and test and verify remediation. What is the role of threat intelligence in vulnerability management? Threat intelligence helps in identifying and prioritizing emerging threats and vulnerabilities. Explain network segmentation in security. Network segmentation isolates critical systems to limit exposure to threats and reduce attack surfaces. What is risk-based vulnerability management? It's a method that prioritizes vulnerability based on risk assessments rather than just severity scores. Explain false positive and false negatives in scanning. False positives are incorrect vulnerability detections, and false negatives are undetected vulnerabilities. Whereas false positives are if any vulnerabilities that are identified, it will show in the report for the specific asset it is having vulnerabilities. But when we go to the server, and even though the vulnerabilities are fixed, but the vulnerability remains the same. In that case, we can call those vulnerabilities as false positive. And false negatives are even though vulnerability scanning has been performed successfully, so some vulnerabilities may not detect. So we can call them as false negatives. What is a compensating control? A security measure implemented when direct remediation, means patching is not available, such as firewall rules or monitoring or any misconfiguration. How do you ensure compliance with security policies? So we can perform regular audits, automated compliance checks, reporting, and enforcing security policies through GPOs and scripts. How do you handle vulnerabilities in cloud environments? Use cloud native security tools, perform continuous monitoring, ensure compliance with cloud security frameworks. What are some common web application vulnerabilities? We can call it as OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities includes SQL injection, XSS, CSRF, broken authentication, and security misconfigurations. How do we manage vulnerabilities in third-party software? Monitor vendor advisories, test patches in a controlled environment, and implement compensating controls if patches are unavailable. Explain the importance of log analysis in vulnerability management. Log analysis helps to detect exploits attempts, anomalous behavior, and signs of compromise from unpatched vulnerabilities. What steps do you take to prevent privilege escalation attacks? We can implement the principle of least privilege, use multi-factor authentication, restrict administrative access, and monitor account activities. What is container security and how do you manage vulnerabilities in containers? Use container image scanning, enforce least privilege, and monitor runtime activities and apply Kubernetes securities best practices. What are some advanced persistent threat APT attack techniques. And APTs use phishing, zero-day exploits, and lateral movement to inflate and persist in networks undetected. Explain vulnerability management automation. Automation involves using tools like Ansible, SIEM, and scripts to schedule scans, deploy patches, and generate reports. What is software bill of materials, SBOM, and why is it important? SBOM lists all components in software, helping identify vulnerabilities in third-party dependencies. Explain the role of SIEM in vulnerability management. SIEM helps in correlate vulnerabilities, scan results with security logs, providing visibility into exploit attempts. SIEM stands for Security Information Event Management. So here we come with scenario questions. A critical vulnerability has been exploited. What steps do you take? Immediate containment, forensic analysis, patching, monitoring, and post-incident review. A business critical application cannot be patched. What do you do? Apply compensating controls, restrict network access, and work with vendors for a long-term solution. Your vulnerability scanner detects false positives. How do you verify? Cross-check findings with threat intelligence, manually access vulnerabilities, and validate with alternative tools. A newly deployed server is vulnerable. What security measures do you apply? Harden the server and apply missing patches, enable logging, and restrict unnecessary services. Your security team needs a vulnerability remediation report. What details you include? We can include vulnerability ID and affected assets, severity, remediation, action, and status updates and compliance status. We can also include the if you are taking example of a Windows and Linux servers, we can include the OS information also and the IPs in order to identify what vulnerabilities are there. A zero-day vulnerability affecting your organization is disclosed. What is your response? Evaluate impact and apply mitigations, monitor exploit attempts, and coordinate with security vendors. You discover a misconfigured firewall, exposing critical systems. What steps do you take? Immediately correct the configuration and audit access logs and perform security testing and enhance firewall policies. A compliance audit finds unpatched vulnerabilities. How do you respond? Assess risk, provide remediation timelines, implement patching, and improve vulnerability management process. A newly hired employee reports a phishing email. What actions do you take? Analyze the email and educate employees, block malicious domains, and update security policies. Your organization is expanding its cloud infrastructure. How do you secure it? Implement cloud security best practices using IAM controls, enable logging, and conduct regular audits. So here we can complete these scenario and L1, L2, L3 interview questions. And here I explain the these interview question and answers in a short. And you can, while you're preparing, you need to elaborate what details we need to mention. You can give also include examples in order to explain the interviewer so that you will have a high chance to hire. Thank you.